Yeah, on.
Two twins.
Yay, yay, yay. Good morning to you, Nubs. Good morning, Nubs. How are you? How did you sleep? Did you have any good dreams or were they nightmares? Dun, dun.
Dude, can you do that every morning? Because that's like the most joyous. See, I think you and I are the same way in this way. I'm like really picky about how people greet me in the morning.
Yeah.
I don't like, the good morning, like it's gotta be, it's a unique way to do it.
Yeah.
Have it be the right way.
It has to be like, if you're going to be over the top, you got to be like shticky about it.
Yes.
You got to get a laugh. If you're just being annoying, then that's like, get away from me. But if you're really over the top and you can get a little bit of a laugh or a rise out of the non-morning person, it can work. It can kind of work.
Absolutely. And I also think there's a distinct difference between the effectiveness of a morning person within gender. So like a dude morning person is just like, gets on my nerves immediately. It's just like, oh, like what's wrong with you? But like a chick morning person, she's kind of, like you said, sticky, fun, kind of bubbly. I don't know. For some reason, it's okay in that way. So
interesting.
I don't know,
Is that almost like the difference between getting a massage from a female versus a massage from a dude? Just like, don't want it. It's like, no, not doing that.
Yeah. I think it's like, I don't know, just a bubbly person in the morning just really has to do it right.
Well, one of the things I'm very impressed by this morning is our punctuality. We said we're going to do X time. And like you and I are both, I think it's fair to say we're both notoriously kind of late,
questionable punctuality skills
for things. Typically, like right at X o'clock, we were like freaking on it.
Absolutely.
It's a kind of a rarity. It's kind of a moment to take notice of. I
actually woke up this morning and wanted to spend a little time with today's album choice because it kind of doubles as a nice morning album too. It's one thing I noticed about it.
Yeah.
Kind of like seize the day,
Yeah, it can get you revved up. Well, one of the things that'll be interesting about today, and we breathed on this in the Lateralis episode 2 episodes ago, in terms of really kind of redefining your band and redefining your approach and using a specific album to do so. Kind of a hard pivot type of record. Now, Lateralis, I would say, was a soft pivot for Tool. They had already been showing signs of progressive metal and time signature play and instrumentation and, some of these things that certainly were taken up a notch in Lateralis. But today's album, we're truly talking about something that was an overhaul, and was an intentional overhaul in the way that it came across as a concept, in the way that the instrumentation that this band had kind of become noted for was completely turned upside down in terms of guitar work and percussive nature of things. And even vocally,
yeah, I mean,
a lot more.
That's where I hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot more blending of vocal approach, a lot less of the formulaic kind of rap than scream stuff. And we will get all into it. But I think part of what's cool about today is this was a very polarizing record for Linkin Park fans. And I'm dying to know which side of this you came down on, because I know it's a band that we both like. And it's a band that obviously, very sadly will be no more after the, terribly sad death of Chester Bennington, by suicide, which is really unfortunate. And it's one of those moments where, and this happens a lot, but you feel obviously awful for whatever Chester was dealing with and for his family and friends and all that. But you feel really bad for his band, because Mike and Brad and these guys, this was their life's work. And, this is not the type of band that can go on without Chester Bennington as part of it. And this happens from time to time, when, and sometimes, bands have already sort of run their course a little bit, or bands can pick up the pieces in some way and move on. Alice in Chains is a good example, similar to Typo Negative, with Peter Steele, or even without death, like the band I always think about is Lost Prophets, who was like one of my favorite bands. Sure. And it wasn't a death, but it was this, absolutely unspeakably terrible thing that the singer Ian Watkins did. And he got, put in prison for most of the rest of his life. You think about the band a little bit at some point, it's like these guys can no longer operate under that brand that they, to your point, took years to build. And they go from touring festivals to the next year, having to do GoFundMes to take care of their families. Right. And totally out of their own control, in the same way of the Chester Bennington situation and the Peter Steele situation. Your world gets turned upside down professionally and personally. And a lot of people don't realize that, they read the headlines or they hear about it and they just like, oh, too bad, no more music. Well, that also means huge professional sacrifices and really impact for a lot of people. It's not just the musicians in the band. By this point, Linkin Park was a business. There were lots of people that don't appear on stage that relied on the band for their own well-being as well. So you're right. These things have tremendous impacts and a lot of things people don't realize. Well, now I'm sad.
You're right. Well, it is a little sad, isn't it? Like anytime you listen to an artist after their death, when you know that they could still be around, that they would very likely still be around. Yeah. It's a little tough, Well, what's interesting about this record is there is certainly, it's pretty intense. There's certainly a concept weaved throughout, but at least in my view, there's something uplifting about it. There's something uplifting creatively about a band really going for it, really pushing those boundaries, really saying, we don't just want to be formulaic anymore. And we're not sure how it's going to be reacted to. We're not sure what the response is going to be, but to an extent, we don't really care. We're just going to go for it. And that is part of what we will talk through in today's episode. But let's not get there too fast now, buddy, because first we got to find out what has been around and run. Nubs, anything in the long play format that has been tickling you of lately? Let's hear it, buddy. Yeah, I've been enjoying the long play format. I like the long play format. Don't you, T?
Well, we do. We have done 52 episodes of the podcast about it.
Why we're here, exactly. So I'm going to choose 3 new releases, of course, from old artists, because that's kind of my thing. I haven't bought a new album by a new band in quite some time, but there's lots of vintage artists that continue to pour out really fantastic material. The first is the Downs Braid Association. The album is Hallison Hymns. This is Jeff Downs, who's in Yes, Was in Asia. Very, very influential and great keyboardist and songwriter. And he's partnered with Chris Braid. It's an outstanding album. It's just smooth songwriting. It's a little proggy, but not over the top. And it's got great Roger Dean artwork, and just really been enjoying that album. Second would be, and T, I don't know if you've heard it yet. Have you heard Intruder yet? The new Gary Newman album?
Man, I've got it, and I just need to plow through. I'm actually the next few days, I'm going away, a little trip, and I'm planning to absorb a lot of of actually really good new releases. Yeah. And Intruder is one of them. Have you plowed through yet?
Absolutely. It's excellent. It's a little brighter than his last several albums. And he's gotten back into, every once in a while he'll do this little throwback move, but he's using the same drum box sound from the album Dance on a number of the tracks. I think it was 1980 album. And so there's this little throwback thing. It's a little punchier, a little catchier, actually. And still kind of that modern Newman sound, but it's got some of his best moments of songwriting in years on it. So I've been really, really enjoying it. And thank you, Gary, for continuing to do what you do. I can't wait to see you in concert next fall, I believe. And then lastly would be a new album from Styx, which is Crash of the Crown. Not quite as good as their previous album, The Mission, which was my album of the year that year. And it was a total return to form for Styx. But Crash of the Crown it really shows off the band's musicianship. You could tell they recorded it during COVID and they had a lot of time to flesh out ideas. And that band just continues to get better and better. It's incredible for a group that's been around for as many decades as Styx has, how good they still are. And if you see them live, it's the same deal. They play the same set virtually every time they tour, which is sort of annoying, but great to have new music from them and have a band that's that amazing still continue on. And you can hear us talk about Styx on, I don't remember what episode that was, T. It was somewhere, what was that? Somewhere in the 20s, maybe?
Yeah, nice callback plug there. Yeah, that had to be in the 20s or so when you took us through Pieces of Eight.
Pieces of Eight, exactly. So 3 new albums by 3 not new artists. So there you go. T, what is spinning round and round for you?
Well, the first for me, New Blaze, is Level 42. The record is World Machine, which was obviously the record they were most known for. I got to say, man, like Mark King is one of the best bass players of all time.
Oh, there's no doubt. No doubt.
I don't know why he's not in the conversation more. I mean, clearly, Geddy Lee, Claypool, Entwistle, these are all great, great players. I'm sure I just forgot like 5 super important ones. Jocko. Let's see. What else am I forgetting?
Squire.
Flea is pretty good. Squire, sure. But Mark King should be way, way up there in that conversation. And I mean,
if you talk to hardcore bassists, he actually is.
Oh, good. Okay.
He is, but not in the mainstream. But you know, bassists always, they have their own little club.
Well, I want to take Mark King mainstream. Let's go.
Yeah,
let's do it.
Yeah, I love it.
But he's incredible. I mean, he's incredible, and he sings while he does. I mean, it's very Geddy Lee-esque in terms of, okay, how does he do that and sing at the same time? A lot of pop, a lot of slap action to his playing. Really impressive stuff. I mean, shoot, just go on YouTube and watch a Level 42 live.
That's what I was just going to say. Go to YouTube and your eyes will pop out of your head. It's like, whoa, this guy's amazing. And he was the band. The other guys were good support, but it was Mark King was the sound.
Indeed. The second is another band with an unheralded player, and that's Baroness, the Purple record, which is, I think, all in all, my favorite from those guys. But, you got Sebi on drums, and I think he's one of the finest out there. Very unique drummer, but love Seb. Love how he wears those giant gold chains while he plays the drums.
And he does that with Baroness too, right? Like I thought that was just a Trans Am thing, but does he do it with Baroness too?
I think he always does it. It's great. I mean, it's the biggest goddamn chain you've ever seen. I mean, it's like so huge. I don't know how he plays with it. It's so funny.
That was the last great Baroness album too. And I'm glad he was on it, but I did not care for the last one at all. I think it was gold and gray. I get the colors confused, but purple was exceptional. But yeah, I'm concerned Baroness might not make another great album.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And then the third, in that same sort of genre is Barry Manilow's self-titled record, which we talked about this a little bit in the Manilow episode, but this is his pop record. And I'll tell you what, man, I just love it. I think these are great songs, really, really well performed, well produced. And I love the yellow self-titled with kind of the weird feminine looking picture of Barry on the front.
Well, and it's got Could It Be Magic on it. So that helps.
I'm talking about the one from the 90s. Like the
other that Manilow. It's good. The album title is Manilow.
Yeah, the pop record. Yeah.
So it's not self-titled. Yeah, I got it.
Well, okay. Fair enough. Enough.
I thought you were talking about the first, Barry Manilow 1. So now
right.
I think you had that around before. You must listen to that endlessly.
Love that album.
It's a long way up. The closer.
It's a long way up. Great close. I mean, In Search of Love. I mean, these are great songs.
It's a long way up when you come. It's such a long way up. You gotta push a little harder.
It's very inspiring.
It's Olympics time. We'll talk about this on one of the tracks with
that's right.
The album today. But it's a long way up. Could be one of those NBC Olympics montages.
Yeah, kind of like that. Remember that Olympics soundtrack in the 80s?
Oh, One Moment in Time.
One Moment in Time. And then that Four Top song, Hard to Hard in a storm we can weather. You and I, we become united forever. Two hearts that can beat as one. There ain't a single thing we can overcome. We're indestructible. Indestructible. We got the power of love. So strong we can generate over the sun and love. Nothing can penetrate. We're indestructible. Indestructible. Man, it's so good. Just makes you want to just go run through a brick wall, doesn't it?
Those wish people could have seen us perform arms flailing and fist pumping, and come on.
So true. We were way into it there.
My voice is gone now. I'm sorry.
These are those moments you wish it was a video pod. Especially Nubs has like the Bam Bam thing going on top of his head. He's got his hair pulled up into a sort of top.
Yeah, pebbles.
Tail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that a white? You think he's a white, like little hair tie?
Yes.
So him with that hairstyle, really getting into it on Indestructible by the Four Tops, you just can't beat that.
It's really
Why don't we? Yeah, well, now that that's out of the way, let's get to those nerdy dates. What do you think?
You want some dirty deeds? Yeah. You want some dirty deeds?
All right. 1,000 Suns was released on September 10th, 2010. This was Linkin Park's fourth studio album. And much like its predecessor, which was called Minutes to Midnight, this was produced by Rick Rubin and Mike Shinoda. And I don't know, I'm not sure how. I mean, Mike was, I think, always a co-producer on all their records. So I've always wondered kind of what his direct impact was on these two albums. Typically with Rick Rubin, he kind of mans the ship. So I'm not sure how collaborative the production was, but clearly a lot of people forget that Rick Rubin had this run with Linkin Park, but obviously two of their more layered and certainly in this case, their most experimental album. Not terribly surprising that you had somebody like Rick Rubin at the helm. As we said from the onset, this was a very polarizing release for fans. Critics, for the most part, liked it. There were a few that thought it was kind of melodramatic bunk, but for the most part, it was very critically acclaimed. Half the fans loved it, half the fans hated it. Can't wait to see where you land, Nubbins. It is a concept album that obviously debuted a lot of new sounds, a lot of new approaches, and a lot of new experimentation. And, the themes kind of tackle technology and nuclear war and social issues. In fact, speaking of nuclear war, the title 1,000 Suns actually came from Robert J. Oppenheimer, who was the head of the Manhattan Project in the 40s, which basically, sparked the development of the atomic bomb. And the legend has it that when Oppenheimer and his team of physicists sort of deployed this A-bomb for the first time, which I think was out in the middle of New Mexico somewhere, that he actually, the first thing he said was a line from a Hindu scripture. Apparently he was, well, when he wasn't creating atomic bombs, he was really into Hindu scripture. So
this is not legend. Actually, he was one of the most peaceful men you would ever see. That's one of the great ironies. I mean, Robert Oppenheimer did not set out to create something that would destroy the world. He set out to do something extraordinary in science. So,
well, I mean, listen, you think you're well-rounded. I mean, come on.
Right, yeah.
You actually hear his voice, Oppenheimer's voice. Obviously, a big sort of theme of not just the title, but the kind of overall concept of the record. It was commercially very successful, as was, to your point, Nubs, you said it perfectly. Linkin Park was a business at this point. They were going to debut at number one. They did with this record in over 10 charts. They were all over the US Billboard charts on this one. So, regardless of the fact that it was a bit of a change in direction, it kind of shows where the band was at, at this time. They were hugely popular. They were the type of group that you could hear on a top 40 station. You could hear on a rock station. You could hear on a metal kind of ish station. And you could also hear, as we've noted with a few previous bands, at the Gentleman's Establishment Club.
Yeah, I guess so. More like the Hybrid Theory stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't know, but I reckon
you've heard.
Yeah, I reckon that their material has been, showcased in such a format.
The other thing too is it was showcased at any concert venue near you twice a year. I mean, this band toured very aggressively, certainly for the first few years of its career. I don't know how that tapered off later. And some of this music would even starting with Minutes to Midnight. I remember live. My first experience with that album was that they did like a Saturday Night Live appearance, and you could tell that the music was more challenging to pull off live than, let's say, Paper Cut or Points of Authority or One Step Closer. Right. And so I wonder.
Or in the end.
Yeah, in the end. Absolutely.
You know what? Speaking of in the end, we haven't. Well, I guess we did perform. we just performed. We performed. You're probably out of voice, but can we give a little in the end, just to everybody, just to give them a little breakfast this morning?
Okay.
All right. Well, listen. How about you do the rap and I'll do the singing?
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, so that line, things aren't the way that you. Can we start there?
Yeah, that might be the only voice I have left after our Barry Manilow.
Exactly. I'm gonna take it easy.
Four Tops thing. Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's see if we can. Let's see if we can do this. I don't know. This might be a disaster as usual, but All right, you ready? Here we go.
Okay. All right, here we go.
Okay, here we go. There.
Things aren't the way they were before. You wouldn't even recognize me anymore now that you knew me back then. But it all comes back to me in the end. You kept everything inside. And even though I tried, it all fell apart. What it meant to me will eventually be a memory of a time when I tried so hard
and got so far. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. I had to fall to lose it all. But in the end, it doesn't even matter.
One,
oh my goodness.
That takes it out of your voice, man. I don't know how he did that.
How did he do that?
And the other thing too, he was not, a lot of these guys will find a way to do that in a soft, they use their deep voice and they're essentially yelling, but they do it in a way that the volume isn't that high. The microphone takes over and they're able to protect some of their voice. He was not doing that. Like he was letting it fly every time. You could tell he was opening up his throat and going, and like, I don't know how he would be able to talk.
Some of those guys, they just have a gift for that sort of thing. But Lastly, I would note is it was kind of a early-ish example of a band really utilizing video games to promote their songs. They actually had a couple of tunes, The Catalyst most notably, featured in a couple of video games even before the album was released. So, kind of, again, this was 2010. Certainly the tide had already shifted to digital in a lot of ways, but the tide was starting to shift as far as how you need to promote your music and how you need to promote a release. And you started to see, Rock Band, and you started to see a lot of these different ways that bands were utilizing non-traditional and unique methods to kind of get the word out there about their songs or their new records or showcase particular songs in that format. So kind of an early example of that. Nubs, let's get to your wonder story. Nubs, do you recall your, first time, last time, middle time, that you interacted, discovered, saw this band live? What's your Linkin Park wonder story, buddy?
Definitely a college some of those things. This is Hybrid Theory came out in 2000. That would have been my sophomore year at the Ohio State University. So
yeah. Not a good football school. Though. No,
we struggle.
Yep.
We struggle in those areas. Yep. No doubt.
Not good.
But can't wait for this season, by the way. But this album was a good fit for Midwest audiences and did very, very well almost from the beginning. This was one of those that you'd hear blasting out of people's dorm rooms, virtually for an entire year. What really got me was the first time I saw them live was sometime that year or the next year. I saw them in some sort of package tour in Columbus, and their live set was pretty stunning. It was very energetic, very passionate. You had the two vocalists, which I'm always a sucker for. And you kind of saw that this band had these two leaders, like Chester led in one way and Mike led in one way. But I was also really impressed by the other guys in the band, and I know that hindsight has given Chester a lot of attention, and Mike has gone on to be very influential in the music business. But I was super impressed with Brad Delson, the guitarist, and still am. I just love the way he played. And I thought Rob Borden was a really good drummer. I thought he paced things really well, and he played well. Like, he complemented electronic rhythm tracks really well, which is not easy for a drummer. But I remember Delson in particular. I was like, okay, this dude plays differently. And he, wore the headphones, just something visually about him that was cool. So seeing them live was big. And then, like I said, when Meteora came out, I was kind of in. It fell off a little bit near the end of the band's run. And we'll talk about that as we get into this album. But I always found them to be, at the very least, one of, if not the most interesting bands in the mainstream during this early 2000s. If you weren't at least interested in Linkin Park, then you probably weren't that into music, or at least into things that pushed genres and pushed boundaries. So, that was kind of my Linkin Park story. I just remember more than anything else live how visually stunning they were and how good they sounded. They were a really, really good sounding live band. One of the times I did see them was at the Summer Sanitarium tour. That was the second time I saw it. This is when Metallica puts together a traveling circus.
Yeah.
And it was at the Silverdome, which is no longer. And this was on Meteora. And I remember thinking, well, this band has just grown so much between the 2 years or 3 years or whatever it was that I last saw them. So
I'm sure there were no shenanigans there were never shenanigans at the Pontiac Silverdome. That was a classy place. Yeah, that classy venue.
That place was nuts. Ironically though, it was more dangerous for a Lions game than it was for a Metallica concert.
That's so
true. You were more likely to get in a fight during the third quarter of the Lions getting beat by the Broncos 37-3 Then you were at, Metallica, Limp Bizkit at the Summer Sanitarium with Fred Durst trying to stir everyone into a frenzy. That lineup was pretty incredible. It was Metallica, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, Mudvayne, and Deftones. Like just think about that lineup.
Jeez.
First of all, it was incredible. I mean, it was just one, great band after another.
Yeah.
But you look back and it's like, wow, Metallica really, this was on Saint Anger. And it was like, they really were trying to reinvent themselves,
Except for Mudvayne, of course. I know the rest. Oh. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Mudvayne. Love Mudvayne.
I know, I'm kidding.
Love Mudvayne. T, what's
honestly,
what's your my story?
I never got to see him live, which actually bums me out. But my sort of main memory and story around Linkin Park actually comes related to this album, which was my album of the year, admittedly, in 2010. Full disclosure. But
I wonder where you're going to put this one on the final cut.
Well, you never know.
You never know.
You threw me for a loop by, collecting dust on Lateralis. So you never know where these things land, right?
Throw it for a loop.
Exactly. So my, was she my wife or girlfriend? Let's see. This was September 2010. Oh, we had just gotten married. We were married for like a month, liking each other and having
enjoying each other's company. Yeah,
that's right. And we, this was back when Saturday Night Live was pretty good, and I was a regular watcher. And Linkin Park was on SNL. It had to be right around this time, and they played two songs. I'll mention what they are when we get to them off this record. And this was as SNL was starting to change kind of the visual approach of its music guests, where they were doing a lot of production and a lot of effects and elements.
Camera tricks.
Yeah. And some of that was cool. Like I remember Kanye West played one time and it was really cool. But then they kind of took that and started doing it with a lot of different bands. And sometimes it was all right. And sometimes it was like, can't we just watch the band? Like, do we have to make it all produced?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
That was always the cool thing about bands being on Saturday Night Live, was it was sort of raw and they were playing live. But you're right. Eventually they caught the same bug everybody else did, which is like, we need to create our YouTube moment,
Yeah. And they've ruined many things, I think, within that show. But this was kind of early on in that part. Now, they did that on this appearance, but what they did is they basically put Linkin Park all in black and white. And it was really cool. So they didn't put a bunch of weird effects and lights and stuff. They basically just put the band in black and white in this very hazy kind of view, which actually fit really well. And I had never heard these two songs before. The album had either just come out or it was just about to come out. And I was watching it, with who had just become Mrs. T. So she's probably sitting there all regretful and miserable.
It's, wondering what the hell she
Linkin
did.
Park came on and played their first song. And then we watched the rest of the show. And then they played their second song. And I kid you not, right when they finished their second song, we both looked at each other, and basically at the same time, we were like, can we rewind this and watch Linkin Park again? And we watched it 3 times. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but watching, let's see, carry the 2, 6. This would be 6 performances, 3 songs times 2, 6. There you go. Kind of in one sitting, because you liked it so much, is pretty rare. But I remember distinctly.
And plus for Mrs. T, who probably spent most of the day listening to the Rent soundtrack.
Yes.
I mean, that says a lot that she was so, impressed by what she saw.
That's exactly right. And so, and I'm telling you, she was just as enthused as I was. It was like, wow, that was incredible and very memorable, because then I, got the album and it was like, yeah, these songs really are even better in their recorded format. And then it of course became my album of the year in 2010. So it's one of those, even, obviously concerts are concerts, but you even sometimes have these, not to compare it to the Beatles and Ed Sullivan or anything, but you have these TV performances that you always remember too. And I remember we talked about Nirvana Live and Loud all the way back in episode Uno. We talked about that one. And certainly there have been television performance moments that are classic and important, right? And nothing's like going to see a band live, but there are moments that become very memorable. Linkin Park on SNL playing these songs from 1,000 Suns is one of those for me. Just extremely memorable. We rewinding it and watching it 3 times was pretty neat. I don't think I've ever done that before for a band, even my favorite bands that have played on TV. It was just a very striking, very compelling performance. And I think the fact that they were doing something that was so unique to what you'd anticipate from Linkin Park was a big part of that. But always wish I could have seen them live, but we'll always remember that. And it's on Venmo or YouTube or something. So if you haven't checked it out, go back and do it. It's well worth the watch. Nub, you ready to get down into it?
Let's drop the needle, man. All right, so this one's a little peculiar. There are a lot of tracks,
the Tool record, and we've done it a few other times, that are more true to the concept, that aren't actual songs. They're spoken words at some points. They're kind of thematic to the overall progression and concept of the record in some cases, but we're just going to stick to the songs. Now, there are 9 actual songs on the record. Now, a quick review of the kind of more spoken tracks. This would be the Requiem, the Radiance, Empty Spaces, Jornada del Muerto. I'm sure I butchered that. Wisdom, Justice, and Love. And then a track called The Fallout. Now, with here, you see everything from one features, as I mentioned before, spoken word from Robert J. Oppenheimer. Another features kind of this cadence and theme from a later song called The Catalyst that's more spoken by a female voice. You hear a speech by Martin Luther King during one of the later tracks. You hear Shinoda on the vocoder a couple times. So, it's a variety. None of them are too long. I actually think it's pretty tasteful, and it's unlike the Tool ones where sometimes you just want to flip through them as fast as you can. If you're absorbing 1,000 Suns as a whole, I actually think taking in these tracks is kind of okay, even though there are quite a few of them. But we'll obviously stick to the 9 songs, the first of which is Burning in the Skies. This one's really led by, a Chester vocal. And certainly on this record, you get a lot more pure singing from Chester than you do screaming. More so in the past. Now, he had already started to prove himself as a very melodic singer, but you get a lot more of kind of a soft vocal approach from him. And certainly you get that right away here on Burning in the Skies. I think, right away you get a sense that rhythmically this is going to be a little bit different. And even in its textures, particularly the guitar layer, this is more of kind of a sort of a low gainy, tube screamer type guitar treatment rather than a high gain guitar riff that you kind of typically got with Linkin Park. So it takes till track 3, I think it is, to actually get to Burning in the Skies, but it is the first song on the record. Nubs, how do you feel about the way this one kicks off?
So, I'm glad you did all the interludes in one, because they're part of the album. They're part of the journey. There's a lot of them, right? I do like the way that they package an album, but it takes you a little while to get to your point, to this first real song. It's got a nice driving backbeat. You're hearing this new vocal style from Chester, still aggressive, but much less of the throaty screaming and more of the melodic sort of singing. They got into this. It's certainly not festival rock at all. I don't want to corner it into that sound, but it is a little bit more of that thump, that sort of thing where everything's got to have this driving, thumping deal pacing it. And, that became a little bit formulaic at times. What I like about it is the melody, and I like the melodic aspect of it. I think and that's a trademark of this album. You mentioned earlier, does the whole thing get a little melodramatic at times? And this song plays its role in that as well. But it's a nice way to kick things off and show that this album is going to be, something a little bit different, even when you compare it to Minutes to Midnight, which was different, of course.
Yeah, one of the things a lot of people have kind of gone back and done, and we're not big lyric guys, but if you go back and revisit, including some of the things Chester's saying on Burning in the Skies, it's a little sad. I mean, you can oftentimes hear him kind of crying out that, for help. And I don't know how many people were familiar with how much he needed help or, how much he was struggling, but it's almost a little eerie to go back and kind of listen to some of those, some of that lyrical output from him. But it's really difficult to match the kind of emotional output of a, Chester Bennington vocal when he's really into it. And the screaming's great. You get a little bit of that, throughout A Thousand Suns, but I think we're really kind of starting to hear kind of that softer voice. In that approach that, perhaps the band was wanting to go a little bit more long-term, here right away from the onset. All right. Well, speaking of rhythmic, let's get into one of the SNL songs that I noted earlier. This was actually the second one they played, and this is When They Come For Me. Nubs, you can kind of get a sense for, how and why this sort of caused us to hit the rewind button, because this was their second performance. And their live presentation of this, I'm sure they did it the same way in their concerts, was really impressive. They were all on drums, except for Mike. And Mike was playing that little bit of sort of keyboard effect. And then obviously stepping out for the main sort of rap piece during the verses. But, Chester was drumming and singing. Brad was drumming. So they kind of, wheeled out this percussive presentation on stage. And it was extremely cool and extremely, well reproduced. Not an easy song to reproduce. But I think this is just an incredible high point on the record, especially with it being basically track 2. Now you're really realizing that you're getting something unique and different. And, this is a song that I could probably listen to, daily and not get sick of. Where's it land for you?
I absolutely love this song, and it's got the anthemic chorus without being anthemic, right? You don't feel like it's cheesy or anything like that. It's amazing how every band seemingly at some point ends up in like a tribal rhythmic fascination. Every band or every artist seems to sort of at some point get there. And this is certainly that. So you're taking that idea of a driving backbeat, but you're adding in this tribal aspect to it that is really cool. It's something that you kind of sink into as a listener. And that says a lot, because it could be seen as a little bit overdone, because we've seen this movie before where a band kind of gets into tribal beats and goes in that direction. But the way they do it with the voices is really cool. One of the things that stands out, I think this is one of 2 tracks where you can kind of feel, especially on first listen, that like it's going to be a Mike Shinoda song and you're just waiting for it. And then you just hear him go, yeah. before he starts his first.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think he's done that on many Linkin Park songs, but yeah. It's like he's walked in the room. Hey, everyone.
Yeah. One of the things, and obviously you saw a full show live, but between clips and those things, I tried to get a pretty good idea of what these guys were like live. But Mike Shinoda had a good time playing this music. One of the things I love, I love when bands can play intense music and be very passionate about their work, but also have a good time with it. I mean, it's kind of like, it's sort of like when you see, a professional basketball player that's like miserable. It's like, dude, you get to go out and get paid to play basketball all the time. Like, give me a break, put a smile on your face. There's an element of that with music where, and again, not everything is as easy as it looks, but where it's like, have a good time. I mean, you're performing for fans that are into it. You're performing music that you can tell you're very connected to and very passionate about. Like, smile and enjoy yourself. And I always loved how Shinoda genuinely seemed to enjoy the process. Part of what makes it heartbreaking that sort of got taken away from him in a way, but I always loved his energy, and his sort of positivity, while also being aggressive at times and intense at times musically.
It helped. It's an awesome take. It helped you connect with him. Chester was tough to connect with because you could just tell there was the anger was a little too real, and that's what made him such an amazing artist. But Mike brought this light, to everything, this sort of more fun side to it. He kind of had the perma smile going on, and I think he liked his job. He never got that vibe from Chester, but I think Mike and the rest of the band, frankly, enjoyed their work. And that's, I don't care whether you work in a factory or you're a touring musician, you're going to be more engaging if you enjoy your work. People are going to notice that and they're going to like it. And so I love the take. I think it's totally right. He would have been the guy who seemed like it would have been fun to hang out with, and extremely artistic, right? I mean, he's got creative vision. He's got all the things that go into being an outstanding musician, but also just seemed like kind of a fun dude,
Well, there are some great moments on the solo record he put out. It was a couple of years ago now. It shows that, he knows what he's doing as well. And check that out if you haven't heard it. It's good to support him on the solo front.
I haven't heard it. I will check it out.
These guys certainly proved on this record, really more so than they had before, that they could, even with their different vibes, that they could blend voices. And that happens pretty effectively here on Robot Boy. A bit more theatric here. This is perhaps a little bit more festival rocky, but this is 10 years ago.
Jumping
this is
onto
not
a
trend. This is previous to a lot of these sounds being developed, and certainly something you wouldn't expect from this band. But boy, after this sort of driving, tribal, rhythmic, punching nature of When They Come For Me, things really smooth out here from Robot Boy. I love that kind of 1-2 punch of different tempos and different kind of vibes, and sort of this swirling nature of Robot Boy, I think is extremely cool.
Gorgeous song. And you nailed it. 1-2 punch. I was going to say that if you didn't. There's something about the way these two songs kind of run parallel to each other in the sequence. This is Linkin Park becoming a band that dabbles in the beautiful, which was not the case in Hybrid Theory. And I have to say, probably not on Meteora either. Maybe a different kind of beauty. You started to see it with like Shadow of the Day and on Minutes to Midnight, but this takes it to a whole new level. I mean, this is kind of a glorious melody. They're singing together in great harmony. I never saw them do this song live, but hopefully they were able to pull it off somewhat well if they performed it. But it's amazing that, if you saw them in Hybrid Theory, you would have never guessed, hey, these guys could blend together with pretty sweet vocals and have it work. Well, they definitely proved over time that it would work. So Robot Boy, definite pinnacle of the album for understandable reasons. It's gorgeous. It's uplifting. This band's able to achieve some kind of hopeful moments for a band that's usually as aggressive as they are. That was a pretty big sea change, and one that got your attention for sure in 2010.
Well, it takes you to the next track, which certainly got a lot more people's attention. This was one of the more successful singles from the group, and this was the first song as part of the SNL performance. So this is the one that kind of made you say, wow, that's really good. And then you heard When They Come For Me and you're like, okay, let's hit the rewind button. This is Waiting for the End. So again, rhythms, blending vocals during these verse sections. It's kind of rap, but it's also sort of just more of kind of a choppy blended vocal. It's very effective. That chorus hook from Chester is an outstanding vocal, but over a beautiful progression. I think Waiting for the End is really, really good. And at this point, boy, you're starting to say, God, these guys really, sort of worked hard at not just the composition here, but the layering and the way they wanted this to sound. And I think Waiting for the End is just yet another high point. What do you think, Nub?
So yeah, this is where the melodrama gets to me. It's, first of all, it's incredibly poppy, just in the chorus. It's, and I don't want to knock a band for being poppy, particularly one like Linkin Park, which avoided that for so much of their material. But this gets a little too cinematic in its attempt to be dramatic, right? And it sort of loses me during this song. I think it has to do with too how amazing the previous couple tracks are. But by this point, this feels like a Taylor Swift song that Linkin Park decided to cover. And that's not, for me, that's not what I enjoy about Linkin Park's music. So this is where that it gets a little melodramatic.
Yeah, critically, a lot of the sort of gripe on the record was that there were moments that were a bit melodramatic, and I get that sort of from the overall vibe of it, but the dichotomy of the verses and the chorus of Waiting for the End, I just think really work. Well, Nubs, you don't have to worry about this one being performed by Taylor Swift. This is Blackout.
Yeah.
Now, it's almost like they kind of said, well, Chester hasn't screamed yet, so let's just have him go absolutely ballistic here on Blackout. I think musically there's some cool stuff going on, right? I mean, but there's that definitely nice a bit more electronic. You can tell that Shinoda is kind of all over this one. I don't know. It's unique on the record. It certainly is one that I think was made to say, okay, we took you in a little poppy direction on Waiting for the End. We still want to remind you all that we're able to be aggressive, but certainly away from the typical sort of Linkin Park formula here and into something where, whether it's Chester's aggressive vocal or this, sort of more aggressive form of electronica, it's certainly something different. So thoughts on Blackout?
Can't stand it, man. Can't even listen to it. It's, first of all, it's missing guitars. Like if you want to do the loud Linkin Park thing and have Chester scream, then have Brad Delson, play some chunky riffs and get some guitars in there. It sounds like a Brian Eno mixed with, the Bee Gees mixed with Slayer. And
what's wrong with any of those guys?
Love them all, of course. There's a tipping point with being eccentric. And I think Blackout is the point where you think, okay, this album started with this musical theme. It's attempting to have cohesion with its interludes and this sort of story, whatever it may be, that seems to be being told musically and maybe lyrically. But there's a flip side to being eccentric where it's like, okay, where does this fit in? And it feels like a crowbar trying to your point, you're right, get Chester's screaming in there. And I just don't, it's just so abrasive. It's so abrasive without any guitars, to try and take these kind of pretty keyboard melodies and just have him like wail over the top of them. I'm not one who's against screaming. That. Listen to a ton of metal. Love electronic music. but there's something about the mismatch that's going on here that's just over the top eccentric.
Yeah, there's certainly the guitar usage on this record is part of what caused some polarization, right? Because a lot of people feel, that Brad's guitar contributions were always so important to this group. And you can tell that there was an intentional, sort of means of getting away from some of that. Now, he's very creative, obviously. And, musically, you always kind of respect in a way, wanting to sort of get away from your core. But certainly a lot of, complaints from a lot of fans were that, hey, Brad, don't put your guitar away just for the sake of it. A lot who kind of perceived this record in more of the change for the sake of change or melodramatic reason certainly had that gripe. Onto a track that Shinoda notes is a bit of a tribute to Public Enemy in a lot of ways here with Wretches and Kings. So this has, actually structurally, Wretches and Kings kind of has the Linkin Park formula, but it's obviously, more electronica, more of a little bit of a rhythmic sort of hip hop approach to it. So you're actually getting this back and forth thing, but it's in a sort of more, I guess, modern per Linkin Park standards way.
It's got some gimmicks from a production standpoint. You're right. If you took out the gimmicks, it pretty much would be your standard Linkin Park song with the back and forth and everything. I like the treated guitars. We just talked about not enough guitar, and it's true. I think the treated guitars are key. You take those away and the song takes on a different life. And, I think it's more Mike's vision than anything else. And I think Chester does a good job of complementing that. And if you're kind of into Mike and you're buying in, then you can get behind this track because, to your point, it still sounds like Linkin Park, and there's that compliment. The Public Enemy thing is interesting. I don't know if he means that from a lyrical perspective or a musical perspective, but I think this. I think
mostly lyrical, but you never know with Mike. You just never know.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not a huge fan of like the dub reggae sort of thing that's going on vocally in Chester's part. It sounds like he's trying to have that vibe, and it comes across a little bit unauthentic. But from a pure song structure standpoint and with the treated guitars, I think the song works. It's Mike, man. It's MC Mike Shinoda, baby. Yeah.
Indeed. We have 3 more tracks and that kind of round out and really, I think, kind of fill out the thematic of the record. So you get some of this stuff during the prelude, during Requiem and Radiance, where you're kind of teeing up some of the conceptual parts of the record. And I think that here at the end, with these last, in the end, I should say, no pun intended, with these last, 3 tracks, you're sort of getting a little bit of an epilogue to this overall thematic. And that kind of begins here with Iridescent. It's poppy, it's anthemic, but boy, it's got a lot of feeling. Much intrigued. Nubs, to this point, your reactions have pretty much been in line with what I was thinking they were going to be. This one, I always have those couple where I'm particularly interested. This is one of those. I have no idea. You could say that you love this. You could say that you hate this. Where do you land?
It's neither. I like it. It's Chester.
It's Chester at his best.
I was wrong again. It's got polish on it. It is a little bit poppy, but it's not as like overtly Taylor Swifty as what we talked about earlier. This song has a lot more genuine feeling to it. I love the passion behind it. I think it's a simple song. I like that. But Chester is mixing his voice up in a way that shows his range without being overwhelming. And it's got that hopeful feel. When this album is at its best, it's hopeful without taking it a little bit too far. And I think this song fits in very, very well with that. So to me, this is one of those late album gems that, you know, kind of brings you back to,
I think that's a good take. You know, they probably struggled at times to make sure, because it is a very genuine artistic group, right? These are not just a bunch of kind of metalheads that want to go out there and start mosh pits. I mean, these guys definitely had an artistic and in some cases emotional, you know, statement that they wanted to get across. And at some points, it was probably a little bit difficult to ensure that that balance was being met properly. But I agree with you on Iridescent. I think that they really find it with the backdrop of a very beautiful melody. And I think an extremely well produced song as well. Well, the second to last track is actually the first single off the record. This is the one that was, you know, very heavily utilized in a lot of the sort of digital promotion and video game promotion and those type of things that you saw early. And this really does kind of pull the thematic that you're getting at the very beginning together with the Catalyst. So this, you know, God Bless Us Everyone is what you get in the female spoken word and, you know, Requiem. So it really does kind of bookend the overall thematic. Again, it's, you know, it's pretty anthemic, and you get, you know, the voice blend kind of working together in a way that's pretty energetic. And, you know, the Catalyst certainly was their decision to kind of have as a lead single. So it does seem to pull together the musical themes and the conceptual things of the album kind of in that one, you know, second to last track. And really kind of the last, I would consider, collective song, since the final one is really just an acoustic and vocal to sort of take you home. But the Catalyst, I think, kind of pulls things together rather appropriately, both musically and conceptually.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive track. I think you nailed it. It sort of brings the whole thing together. I'm always intrigued by the lead single being near the end of the album. You know, it's always a good sign that a band is being really thoughtful about their sequence, because that is so not typical. Then again, by 2010, you know, everything was different. But I like the Catalyst for kind of the whole package. You know, just the top to bottom. Vocal melody is strong. It's got some nice dynamics to it, nice rhythms to it. And, you know, it's kind of the quintessential part of the album. If you wanted to say, hey, like, what does 10,000 Suns sound like? I would probably choose the Catalyst, because it's got some of the pretty moments. It's got some of the harder moments, and all the instrumentation seems to be there. The band seems to be all involved, which is good. That's not the case in every one of these songs. So I think the Catalyst does its job for sure. No doubt about it.
Well, that's certainly not the case here. You go from something that's extremely layered, extremely produced, to a closer that, you know, you could hear Chester and Brad perform sitting in the corner of a pub because it's an acoustic and a vocal, and it's The Messenger.
And you always will be. This melody will bring you right back home when life leaves us blind.
It's an awfully peculiar closer. Now, it's basically like a high school song band that could have written. It's, you know, basic major minor chords, but obviously the vocal performance here is not something that just anybody could have performed. So it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure what the thinking was. I mean, the album could have easily ended with the Catalyst. So there's this element of it where I think it's cool and different and unexpected, And it's a tremendous vocal from Chester, no matter what you think of the song. And then there's an element of like, like, why? So, but again, these guys were doing things in a little bit of a different direction, and
interesting is the right word.
Way to close
there's
1,000 Suns.
The band does thrive on unpredictability. You always wonder when somebody, you said it well earlier, change for the sake of change, or are you really doing something artistically that comes from a really authentic place? Why were they changing? Why were they keeping their audience so far off balance? It's hard to say. You'd have to talk to the guys to know, but I will say that this song keeps you off balance because it's exactly what you would not expect. I like the song. I love the performance. I think it's a terrific performance, and it's really unique to the Linkin Park catalog. But it does make you think. It's like, when does unpredictability become predictable? For a band that thrived on keeping everybody on their toes, you just wonder, at what point did it become too much? But
boy, that was such a wise question you asked it, about unpredictability. It almost reminds me of the question, what's so civil about war anyway? Well, that wraps up 1,000 Suns in very interesting fashion. I think that's a great take on the messenger. Nubs, did this album matter?
I don't think so. I think it matters in the sense that you get to explore this band that went through these many changes. Unfortunately, you never saw the band really get into where their ultimate goal would be. I think the album that follows, The Hunting Party, is terrible.
Awful. I was so excited about that one. It was like, where are these guys going to go? And it was really bad. It was actually really bad.
And that is a factor. Whenever we think about, does it matter? You guys look at what came before, what came after. What came before was Minutes to Midnight, a record that I like better than 10,000 Suns. 10,000 Suns did its thing, and it's memorable. And there's a reason we're talking about it. But then what came after was this directionless thing that I'm not sure Linkin Park would have made it the long run, even if Chester would have stayed alive, because you just wonder, like, where was this whole thing exploring to next? So I don't think it matters in any sort of longevity way. I don't think kids will be listening to this album in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I think for Linkin Park fans, it's a pivotal moment, and it's something that's part of the catalog that's important. But no, I wouldn't say it matters on the whole. But it's very interested to see what you would say about one of your albums of the year. T, does it matter?
No, I actually completely agree with you. I don't think it matters, in that it's a rare instance where, this record that came out, 10 years ago now, is seen as sort of a part of a legacy, because this band is no more. So you start to kind of look at, what is this band going to be known for? And certainly this was a pivotal moment. I think it's an outstanding album, but this was not trademark Linkin Park. This is not when our kids grow up and ask who Linkin Park was, we're probably not going to play them 1,000 Suns, at least right away. They're going to hear Hybrid Theory. They're going to hear Meteora. They're going to hear some of these more classic tracks, I think, that really sort of defined their mainstream appeal. You got to respect the pivot. You got to respect the experimentation, and you got to respect the fact that this was a group that had an artistic statement to make, and they made it. But I agree with you. I don't think it's an album that matters in terms of longevity or in terms of influence. It perhaps did a little bit show the industry at the time, and certainly some bands that had relied on a formula, that you don't need to do so in order to maintain artistic credibility or even establish some commercial credibility. This album did really well. So for those reasons, I think it's something that was fairly important, but in the grand scheme of things, I would not categorize this as an album that particularly matters in the grand scheme of things. All right, buddy, it's the final cut time for Linkin Park's 1,000 Suns. Are you putting this on the turntable, in the collection? Is it collecting dust, or are you taking it to the for sale bin and selling it in return for a financial profit? What do you got?
I had this dilemma recently, because I actually have this album in like I mentioned earlier, super deluxe box. It's got the vinyl, the CD.
Of course you do. Of course you do. Yes. Does it have an Obi strip though?
It does not have an Obi strip. Okay. It's got other memorabilia.
Okay.
And I'm downsizing still. And so I was like, okay, let's do a critical analysis here. Do I want to keep this? And the answer is yes. But I haven't listened to it a whole lot. I'm going to say collecting dust because I understand why it would be in a collection. And I just kept it in my collection. After giving it a top to bottom listen, it was like, okay, this is worthy. And trust me, dude, I've gotten rid of some things that were not, that you would probably be surprised by in terms of artists that I traditionally like. So kept it, collecting dust for me. I think that, again, to Linkin Park fans, which you and I are, the album has a place. On the whole, I don't think it has longevity, but I can understand why it's in one's collection. And I can understand why it was your album of the year. Let's be honest, 2010 wasn't the best year ever for albums. So I get it, So yeah, so T, what are you going to do with an album of the year? I mean, where's your final cut?
It is collecting dust for me too, Nub. And, obviously it's an album that I love. It's an album that, made the elite album of the year list 10 years ago. I think it's held up okay. And what I find myself kind of doing now is, when they come for me, waiting for the end, a couple others that I think are real highlights, I'm sort of singling out, and attaching to playlists. As far as going start to finish, it's a great one to revisit, but I wouldn't say I'm doing it often. So it's certainly part of the collection, but it's one that, I think as time goes on, I'll probably revisit top to bottom less and less, but I do think it's an outstanding effort. I do think at the time it was something unexpected, something you hadn't heard before. And, it's got 2 or 3 tracks that are in, at least in my catalog, are going to be timeless. Start to finish, it's one that I'm going to put in collecting dust, mostly for the reasons you stated. And some of it holds up extremely well. Some of it holds up okay. And, top to bottom on this one, I think that's the appropriate place to stick it. All right. Well, let's see where Dolores decides to stick it here on a little bit of In Your Head. Nub, what's in your head?
What kind of segue is that?
I don't know.
Where Dolores decides to stick it.
I don't know. I have no idea at all. I'm not a professional at this. Go ahead. What do you got, buddy?
I love it. All right. Let's start with Empty Party Rooms, a song by Minus the Bear, which is off of the album Infinity Overhead. I'm sad to see Minus the Bear gone. Really loved that band, and that's a good song. A band called Model Engine, back from the 90s. It came from a group called Black Eyed Siva, and a song Rosinante. This is obscure stuff, guys. You got to check it out, though. Really, really good band. Very underrated. Do you remember Black Eyed Siva, T? They were part of that like Christian thing that we've referenced many times.
Yeah, I kind of do. Yeah.
They were one of the better bands from that era for sure. And then recently watched a little documentary on the Canterbury scene in prog rock in England in the 70s. So I've been listening to some Caravan and the song Waterloo. T, what is in your head? That's worth your time.
There's something about, I don't know what it is lately, but like and you mentioned Van Halen. I think you put I'll Wait in your head either last episode or the episode before. Pound Cake. It's such a effing jam. Like, God, it's so good.
Also known as real. Yeah, God, oh, I love it. Yeah,
it's so awesome. Good. The groove of it, like everybody's playing at a high level. Alex's drumming's awesome. Eddie's guitar work is great. The pulsating, thumping bass from Anthony's awesome. The vocal from Hagar kicks ass.
Sammy is letting it fly on that.
Oh, yeah. It's just one of those tracks where like everything's working. And what a way to kick off for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. I mean,
underrated on Pound Cake too. It's a great call. The bridge, let me get on. It's so good.
Oh, man. The second is a Lindsey Buckingham track called Go Insane. Great track from the 80s.
Yeah.
And the third, a little something different, is by Ian Dury and the Blockheads. This is Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick, which is always a great, summer-ish track. Summer's winding down already. Can you believe it? But
I know it's crazy, but at least football season's on the way. That's always the good part about summer ending.
That's good for you. Good for your OH. For me, it's freaking depressing. But,
you got a new coach. You'll be all right.
Let's hope so, buddy. Hey, I enjoyed this one, man. Thank you for, going through 2010 T's album of the year, Linkin Park's 1,000 Suns. Great band to talk about. Great band to remember, I guess we need to say. And enjoyed it, buddy.
Enjoyed it as always, T. And see you for episode, where are we at? 54 is next?
54 will be next.
Wow. Studio 54.
Studio 54. You going to do a disco record? What do you got?
Yeah, maybe we'll do like a Gloria Gaynor album.
Yeah. Maybe some Donna Summer. Maybe something that Giorgio Moroder contributed to.
Yes.
Everybody thinks he's all cool and everything, right? So
I'll have to raid Mrs. Nubs' collection for the Donna Summer records.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, as for the two of us who aren't cool, no. Yeah,
the last hour proves it. Yeah.
We will be signing off here on episode 53. Tune in next week for episode 54. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Everything be okay. And we'll see you next week for Two Twins and an album.
Two twins and an album.
Well, that's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.